Mark hung an antique mirror he'd bought at a thrift store in the hallway. At first, everything was fine. But then he noticed footsteps coming from the hallway at night. He'd go out, no one was there. But the mirror reflected the room he'd just been in. And in that reflection, in the corner, stood a figure. With each passing day, it grew clearer. And this morning, Mark saw that the figure was no longer in the mirror. It was standing behind him. Mark rented this apartment for 3 years. It was old, with high ceilings and creaky floors, but he liked it. He especially liked the hallway leading from the entryway to the living room. It was long, narrow, with a single window at the end. That's where he hung the mirror. He bought it at a flea market from an elderly woman who said it belonged to her grandmother. The glass was slightly cloudy, the frame heavy, dark wood with carved patterns. Mark paid a small price and brought the find home. He hung the mirror opposite the front door, checking it before going out. For the first few days, nothing strange happened. Mark went to work, came back, and watched TV. Sometimes he noticed the mirror reflected the room slightly differently, as if the viewing angle was off. But he attributed this to the curvature of the old glass. Everything changed on Thursday. Mark woke up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. The footsteps were light, almost inaudible, but in the stillness of the night they seemed loud. He stood up and walked out. The hallway was empty. Mark glanced in the mirror and froze. In the reflection, he saw his room, his bed, his closet. But in the corner where his coat hung, stood a figure. Tall, dark-haired, faceless. Mark turned around. There was no one in the real corner. He looked in the mirror again. The figure stood there. He decided he was tired. He went to bed, but didn't sleep a wink until morning. The next day, the figure became clearer. Now Mark could make out the outline of a body, long hair hanging down along her face. It was a woman. She stood motionless, and where her eyes should have been, black holes gaped. Mark tried to remove the mirror. It wouldn't budge. The hooks on which it hung were screwed very tight. He tried to break the glass with a hammer. The hammer bounced off without leaving a scratch. He called the saleswoman. There was no answer. He arrived at the market. The old woman was gone. Neighboring merchants said she showed up once a month, and no one knew where she lived. Mark returned home at dusk. The light was on in the hallway. He approached the mirror. The woman was no longer standing in the corner, but in the center of the reflection. She was looking straight at him. Her face was pale, her lips black. "Who are you?" Mark asked. Silence. Then the mirror fogged up, and letters appeared on the glass. "I'm here." "Open." Mark recoiled. He wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't obey. The woman in the mirror raised her hand and touched the glass from the inside. Cracks appeared where her fingers pressed against the glass. "Don't," Mark whispered. But the cracks grew. The glass began to crumble and fall to the floor. A cold blast of air, smelling of damp earth and rot, blew out of the hole. Then a hand emerged from the mirror. White, thin, with long nails. It grabbed Mark by the shoulder. He screamed and broke free. He ran for the exit, but the door wouldn't open. He turned around. The woman was standing in the hallway. Half of her body was in the mirror, half outside. She was smiling. "You bought me," she said. "Now I'm yours." Mark pressed himself against the wall, looking at the woman half peeking out of the mirror. Her body was unnaturally pale, almost translucent, black veins visible through her skin. Long black hair, wet strands, hid her face. She took a step forward, and Mark heard the crunch of glass beneath her bare feet. "Don't come any closer," he forced out. She paused, tilting her head as if listening. "You called me," she said. Her voice was quiet, like a whisper, but it carried everywhere. "You hung me in your house. You looked at me every morning. You wanted me to be near." "I didn't know!" Mark screamed. "I just bought a mirror." "A mirror is a door," she replied. "And I'm the one who's been waiting behind it." for 100 years. Until someone opens it. She took another step. Now she stood in the hallway, her entire figure clad in a decayed white dress. A deep wound on her neck oozed black fluid. She smiled, and there was something ancient and human in that smile. "My name is Eliza," she said. "I died in this house 100 years ago. My husband killed me. He stabbed me in front of this mirror so I could see my face at the last moment. I cursed him. I cursed this mirror. And now whoever hangs it will be mine." Mark was trembling. He tried to approach the door, but it was locked. "What will you do to me?" he whispered. "You will become my husband," Eliza replied. "You will take his place. We will live in the mirror. Together. Forever." She held out her hand. Mark closed his eyes, expecting the cold. But nothing happened. He opened them. Eliza stood there, her hand hovering in the air. "I give you 3 days," she said. 3 days to say goodbye to the world. And then you will come to me yourself. Or I will follow you." She stepped into the mirror again. The glass closed behind her, the cracks disappearing. A normal mirror hung in the hallway again, reflecting the empty wall. Mark sat there until morning, unable to move. At dawn, he ran out of the apartment and went to the police. He told them everything, about the mirror, the woman, the curse. The police officer listened, looked at him sympathetically, and advised him to see a psychiatrist. Mark left. He visited every church in the city, but the priests refused to help. One said he wouldn't interfere in such matters, another advised burning the mirror. Mark returned home, grabbed a can of gasoline, doused the mirror, and set it on fire. Flames shot up to the ceiling, but the glass didn't crack. The fire extinguished itself. And on the mirror, in the soot, appeared the words, "Don't try. I always come back." Mark fell to his knees and burst into tears. He realized there was no way out. On the second day, he tried to escape. He rented another apartment and left the city. But when he opened the door to his new apartment, the same mirror was hanging in the hallway. It stared back at him with its cloudy glass, and Eliza stood in the reflection. "You can't run away," she said. "I am everywhere there is a reflection. I am in every glass, in every puddle, in every eye. I am a part of you." Mark covered his face with his hands. When he lowered them, the mirror was gone. He exhaled, but immediately saw his reflection on the phone screen. It was smiling. Not him. He threw away the phone, smashed every mirror in the house. He boarded up the windows. But before bed, he peered into a glass of water. Eliza's face was reflected in the water. She looked at him and whispered, "One day left." Mark greeted the third morning in complete darkness. He taped up all the shiny surfaces, took off his watch and glasses. He sat in the corner and waited. When it grew dark, he heard footsteps. They were coming from the hallway, approaching. The door opened. "The time has come," Eliza said. Mark opened his eyes. He saw her in the darkness. She glowed with a ghostly light, and a smile was frozen on her face. "I won't go," Mark said. "Then I'll come myself." She stepped toward him. Mark jumped up, rushed to the window, broke the glass, and jumped out. His flight was short-lived. He fell into a flower bed, broke his leg, but survived. When he raised his head, Eliza was standing next to him. She didn't touch him, only watched. "You won't die," she said. "You will live. But every night I will come to you. And every night you will feel my fingers squeezing your neck. You'll beg for death, but it won't come. You're mine. Forever." She was gone. Mark lay on the wet grass, looking at the sky. He knew she was right. He knew he'd never be free. A year has passed. Mark lives in the hospital. He doesn't speak, doesn't eat, doesn't sleep. He just stares into space. Sometimes he raises his hand and strokes the air, as if someone were next to him. The doctors talk about post-traumatic stress disorder. But the orderlies on duty at night sometimes see a second shadow in Mark's room. A woman's. She sits on the edge of his bed and holds his hand. And every night, when the clock strikes midnight, Mark opens his mouth and whispers the same thing, "Let me in. I want to be with you." And from the darkness, a quiet laugh answers him. 5 years passed. Mark remained in the psychiatric hospital. He was barely moving, unresponsive, and only occasionally moved his lips, as if speaking to an invisible person. The doctors diagnosed him with catatonic schizophrenia and didn't expect any improvement. One night, a new patient was admitted to the hospital. A young woman who had jumped out of a window to escape a mirror in her apartment. Her name was Lisa. She told the same story. She bought an old mirror, and a figure appeared and began stalking her. Mark heard her scream and opened his eyes for the first time in 5 years. "Did you see her?" he asked, approaching Lisa. "I saw her," she whispered. "She said I was next." Mark took her hand. "She's lying. She always lies. We're not next. We're her food. She feeds on our fear. As long as we're afraid, she's strong. What should I do?" "Don't be afraid. Look in the mirror and don't look away. Show her you're not afraid." That evening, Lisa asked for a mirror. They brought her a small hand mirror. She stared into it for an hour, 2, 3. Elisa's face, her black eyes, her smile appeared in the reflection. Lisa didn't look away. "You're not scary," she said. "You're just pathetic. You died 100 years ago. You're nobody. And I'm alive. And I'm not afraid of you." The mirror cracked. Elisa's face distorted, she screamed, and then vanished. The mirror shattered into tiny pieces. At that moment, Mark felt a weight lifted from his shoulders. He looked out the window. Only his room was reflected in the glass. No figures. No shadows. He was discharged from the hospital a week later. Lisa left a month later. They never saw Lisa again.